Welcome to the Creator's Adventure, where we interview creators from around the world, hearing their stories about growing a business. Today, Melanie Deziel is going to show us what is the right approach when creating content for your business. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, we're here today with Melanie Deziel. She is a keynote speaker, award-winning branded content creator, and the author of 2 books. Melanie is also the co-founder of the Convoy and GroupUps, B2B marketplaces that help small businesses save money so they can invest more in themselves and their communities. Melanie was also the first editor of branded content at the New York Times, a founding member of HuffPost's brand storytelling team, and served as director of creative strategy for Time Inc. Melanie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Cool. So my first question for you is, I like to ask this to everyone now, and it is, what would you say is the biggest thing that either that you did or you are doing that has helped you achieve the freedom to do what you enjoy?
This is such a good question. I'm glad you ask it to everyone because I bet you get so many amazing answers. I think for me, the big thing is being open to new ideas, which may sound really vague, but what I mean is that most of the career changes that I've made, or moving from one company to another or launching a new product, were not necessarily things that I had planned very long in advance. They were things that kind of came to me, or the opportunity presented itself, and being willing to say, okay, this wasn't part of my plan, but this does sound like it could be an interesting opportunity or a good fit, kind of stretch my capabilities. So I think that kind of openness to deviate from whatever plan, you may have had in the beginning kind of allowed me to uncover a lot of cool opportunities.
Cool. So you studied journalism, I see. You started your professional career as a journalist. Can you kind of walk us through that story and how you shifted your focus from like the investigative journalism more to like the branded content creation and marketing that you do now?
Yeah, it's so funny. This is exactly the example of what I was talking about kind of being open to something you didn't plan. So I definitely wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be like the old school journalist, like uncovering corruption and like, fighting for the little guy and like maybe wearing a fedora. I don't know. Like that was the vision that I had for my own career. And what I realized, the timing was just not great for me. When I graduated school, I had received a very like analog journalism education. I was learning how to lay out physical pages of the newspaper. There was not a focus on social media or, websites or any of that digital stuff. The academia hadn't caught up yet. So I went back to school and learned some more of those digital skills. But by the time that I graduated and was really looking for a job, newsrooms were going through that whole process of moving online. They were losing ad revenue because you get far less ad revenue online than you did in print. They were downsizing their teams to compensate. And so I found myself with this whole arsenal of journalism skills and nowhere really to apply them. There just weren't that many journalism jobs at that point in time. And so I was working with a recruiter who was, trying to help me find a placement. And she was the one who said, I have this job at HuffPost. It's not exactly journalism. It's kind of, you're going to make content. It's different content, kind of cagey. Like, I'm not sure if you'll want to do this, but it might be similar enough. And I thought, what? At that point, I was like, I'll take a job. So yes, please, whatever job you have. I never envisioned that I would be in the branded content space, that I would work in marketing or advertising. I always sort of saw myself on almost like the opposite side of that, and so it was an interesting transition, but it was truly just like a situation of opportunity of like, we need someone on the business side who can create content. And I was coming from a journalism background. That's what I was prepared to do. So I approached it a little differently than I think a lot of folks who would have come to that job through marketing or business. I was really coming at it purely from a journalistic perspective. And I used to joke that I was just doing journalism and hoping nobody found out. Like I was really just doing the same thing I knew how to do. But it turned out that was a really interesting, fresh perspective, approaching it like a journalist would. And that, wound up winning me, a lot of recognition, a lot of lucky to win awards for some of the work that we did, but really just using those same skills. So it was a career of opportunity, purely timing. And I don't know that I ever would have found myself there if it was purely based on my planning.
Interesting. So I think I understand, but can you give an example then of like how the journalism background impacted the branded content?
Yeah, for sure. So when you think of sponsored content, branded content, advertising in general, you typically would imagine something that's heavily branded. Lots of logos, big logos, mentioning the brand many times. The product is placed not so gracefully somewhere in the frame of the video or the photo, and the sole purpose of it typically is like talk about the product, sell the product, convert the product. I took it slightly differently to say, well, what is it that the audience of this brand really cares about, and where is the brand's authority to talk about things in that category? So, as an example, I did a lot of work with General Mills, the food company. They have like Cheerios and Yoplait and Progresso soups and lots of other brands. And one of the things we did for Yoplait is rather than just, squares and rectangles featuring nice pictures of yogurt, we actually did recipes where you could substitute yogurt in for something else. So instead of sour cream or instead of mayonnaise or, instead of Cool Whip or something. So instead of just saying like, hey, you should buy this product, it's like, here's a useful recipe. It happens to use Yoplait, but here's a useful recipe from us to you. Finding a way to sort of let the brand be a co-pilot instead of the sole pilot was really how I was trying to do it. And it wasn't, I wish I could tell you that it was some like genius marketing strategy. It was purely like my own discomfort with like, I only know how to write journalism. I know how to do more objective content. So how do I do as close as I can to that within these confines? And it was often asking the brand to take like a sidestep or a step back so that we could present something that had a little bit more standalone value than just purely promoting the product. So another example of that, when I moved over to the New York Times, same job, essentially. I was the first editor of branded content there, building out a team that was going to tell brand stories. So sponsored content on the New York Times website, primarily digital. And, we were working with Netflix. Now, Netflix was trying to promote season 2 of Orange is the New Black at the time, their show about women in prison. So, obviously their goal at the end of the day is like get more people to watch this show. They worked with a number of other publishers. Let's see, the thing they did with BuzzFeed, for example, was like 21 reasons prison might not be so bad. And it was all gifs from the show or quotes from the show, right? So very branded, like the value is anchored and only, there with the brand at the core. What I proposed and what we ended up doing was we actually created an investigative piece about what it's like to be a woman in a prison in the US for real. So not actors, not plot lines, not the show, but we went into prisons, talked to former inmates, talked to prison reform advocates, and like did a massive in-depth investigative piece with video and photo and infographics all about like the real experience of being a woman in prison. And at the end, we have this like call to action. It's more in the form of an ad that says like, if you want to see more of this and like learn more about some of these experiences, then you might enjoy, this show. But the goal was really to say like, look, this is a show about women in prison. So let's show them that they care about women in prison and then they'll care about the show. It was kind of, again, taking a step back, not just showing the characters. We could have spliced into the documentary style video where we're interviewing, current and former inmates, like spliced in clips from the show, but it wouldn't have made sense and it would have felt inauthentic. So that was really always my approach, is like, how can the brand provide something of value that isn't solely the brand itself, right? Like how can they take a look at their other area of expertise, the other value they can provide? Because when people come to the New York Times, like, they're not looking for an ad for Netflix. They're looking for deeply reported content on social issues that are timely, where they can learn something. So like, that's what I wanted to present, right? Like, let's do something deeply reported on a timely issue and teach them something. And in doing that, we managed to really break through the noise. So that piece that we did for Netflix won a number of awards. The video won a video award. The written piece won the best native ad execution award. That's over my shoulder here. And the other thing that was incredible for me, like the best part of it for me, was that it was that piece, that sponsored content piece, was in the top 2% of all the content on nytimes.com that year.
Oh, awesome.
So a piece that was sponsored by a brand, like, was really holding its own. You know, it was worthy of being read and shared and commented on, and like, it actually it built some momentum in the same way that our editorial content did. Clearly labeled, clearly disclosed. There was no tricking anybody. The page was very orange, but you know, really just. To me, that was a signal that like we created something our audience truly loved, and we did that with a brand, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And what year was that again? I don't know if you mentioned.
That was 2014.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So I think I don't know if you would agree with me, but I feel that more and more now brands are starting to realize that this is the necessary way to create content. And our team was
100%.
thinking about it recently that the way that it works now with Google, I feel like as almost if the search results that you find in Google are not as good as they would have been even a few years back or back in 2014. Because nowadays everything is branded. Everybody who's in Google, like they're showing up there because they're trying to sell you something. And so you search for the answer
Yeah.
to something, you search to learn about something, you end up on this page and you say, oh man, this is what I'm getting. Somebody right there in your face
Yeah.
trying to say, buy our thing. And so the content that's valuable and the way you're going to not only provide the value to somebody, but make them happy enough that they will actually consider your product is to put out that real value first and then have the brand
Yeah.
in there, but not just in your face. Hey, buy our thing.
Yeah, 100%. And what's really interesting is, you know, went back then in like the 2013, 2014 era when we were like pitching this kind of stuff, it really was like the first of its kind in that way. Like people were really used to, exactly as you say, like straight up pitching, you know, like instead of recipes, we would have done like 5 reasons you should buy Yoplait yogurt this week at the grocery store. Like it was extremely branded and wasn't providing a lot of non-branded value. And the data shows that people actually are okay with brand content, with content from a brand, when it teaches them something and when it provides value. So those are like the things, like, can I learn from you and am I getting some other kind of value out of this? So that was always my goal. You know, we didn't have that research then. I was just going on like my journalistic gut. But now we have the research that shows that. And it also shows that, believe it or not, content that does have some branding often performs better than content that has no branding. And it's a fine balance, right? But generally they say 1/3 to 1/2 of the way through is where the brand can naturally have an integration. By that point, you've provided enough value that it's okay for them to be aware, but you haven't gotten so far into the piece that when they find out, they will feel deceived, right? Because if you're going through the whole thing, you know, you spend 10 minutes reading an article and at the very end, it's like, and if you want to know the last secret, like schedule a demo. And you're like, dang it, like they got me, they tricked
got
me,
me,
you
yeah.
know? Yeah. So we don't want to create that kind of feeling, but if you get partway through, so in that Netflix piece example, by the way, so like for example, about halfway through, we talked to Piper Kerman, who wrote the book Orange is the New Black that the series is based on. So we brought her in as a source because she was a relevant source. Like she actually went to prison, so we're like talking to her about her experience and saying, you know, she's the author of this book upon which this series is based. Season 2 comes out on such and such date, and then it's like back to business, like talking about, you know, her experience and, you know, how it aligns with some of the other things we were hearing. So I think it makes sense to put the branding in there. You just don't want to be heavy-handed with it. If it's too soon, like whether that's the first few seconds of a video or the first few, paragraphs of a written piece, it just comes off like nobody wants to be sold to, like you said. You know, I want to get some value, and then you can let me know where it's coming from. But like, don't hit me over the head with it right off the bat.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So with that said, you're the author of 2 books. The latest one is called Prove It, Exactly How Modern Marketers Earn Trust. And so in that book, you kind of teach about how marketers can gain the trust of their audience using content creation. Can you explain a little bit about, I guess, how our creators and our audience could potentially take some advice in how they can use content to kind of ethically promote their brand?
100%. So the whole approach with Prove It in the new book is really, you know, we talk a lot about repurposing content, like we've created it and now we're going to try to find more use for it. This is sort of reverse engineering, like pre-purposing it. Like before we create this content, how does it help our brand? How does it help us connect with our audience? Because in a weird way, the pendulum has like swung almost too far in the other direction, where with all the platforms that we have right now, there's this tremendous pressure to be just like constantly creating new content and putting it out everywhere. You know, I got to post 3 times a day on 12 different platforms. And what happens is we get in this hamster wheel of creation and we lose sight of the reason we're there in the first place. Like, does any of this actually support our business goals? Like, is it actually driving toward our major KPIs and not just like dopamine hits of getting likes and followers? Like, are we actually contributing to our broader business goals? So in Prove It, I talk about how you can identify what are the claims you make to your audience, or the promises, expectations, however you want to think about it. What are those claims you're making that are so important you should be providing proof? So we are currently operating in the most skeptical consumer environment we have ever operated in. Like, consumers are so doubtful, so skeptical. It is so difficult to break through the noise because, like, scams abound. Like, spam is out of control, you know, the robocalls and, like, you know, Nigerian lotto winnings. Like, there's just way too much out there. So consumers have to be skeptical. But what that means is we're operating in a different paradigm. So marketers in the old days could just assume that someone sees one of our ads on a billboard, it's one of the only ads they're going to see that day, and they're going to believe us that our thing is delicious. Like, that's not the case anymore. They're going to see our ads or our content now and be like, all right, who's this clown? Like, we have to earn our keep first. You know what I mean? We have to earn that trust. So really encouraging folks to say, like, what is it that I'm trying to prove to my brand? Am I trying to prove that I'm convenient, you know, that our product is fast or easy to use? Am I trying to prove that, you know, we're really connected to our customers? We have a deep relationship. We know each other. We treat you like family. Or are you trying to establish that, you know, you're just really competent, like you have the most experience, you've won a bunch of awards, you have this tremendous background and awesome past clients? Like, what are those things that you're trying to establish? And then how can you create content that backs that up? Whether that means bringing in, you know, quotes from experts, whether it means case studies from your former clients, whether that means you're showing them side by side the way that infomercials do. You don't have to trust us that this vacuum has 5 times more suction. Like, watch this piece of carpet that we vacuumed with both and see how much our thing worked better, you know? So looking for ways that you can really, your content serves as proof, like, bring the receipts. It serves as proof of the claims that you're making so that your audience doesn't have to doubt you because they see the proof there themselves.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I actually have a question, kind of a selfish question, because it made me think of an ad that we ran where we had that issue with the skeptics, right? So with our business, like, we make money from selling our service of our software, right? So if you want to build an online course or whatever, you can use our software. And so our plan was, with this campaign that we ran, that we're not trying to sell you some course or something like that, because we don't need to. We have the software. So that's the reason that we're doing this. And so we want to give that training content away for free, because it doesn't benefit us if you're not successful enough to move forward with the software, then that's what we need in the long term, right? So we're trying to train everyone for free so that the way they can use our software. So that's the reasoning behind it. We tried to explain that. And we had comments on the ads where people literally just said, "I don't believe you." And the offer was that, like, we're going to give you this training for free. Here's the reason we're going to give it for free, because we actually make this course creation software. And when you learn how to do everything, then hopefully you'll use our software to do it and be able to do it longer, because you'll be more successful. And we had comments saying, like, "I don't believe you." And so I wonder, what would you say to someone, doesn't have to be our exact situation, but what would you say to someone where in that single video, they're trying to promote something? And in this case, it was trying to just get somebody's email, and they thought that we were going to really sell them some other kind of course, that we were tricking them. So what would you say to somebody like that, where you're trying to promote yourself and you're being honest, and they're still kind of a skeptic like that?
So as a side note, I would say that the skepticism honestly probably came from the need for the email, because the thought is, okay, well, if I give you my email, then what are you going to sell me, right? One thing you could try, honestly, is like put the actual training content in the video. hey, we know that this is so good. So after I'm done talking in 10 seconds, you're going to get to actually see some of our awesome, our product in action. You don't have to pay for training. Like, we're going to show you because we believe in it so much. So that they can see like, oh, this is like good stuff that they're actually giving away. Maybe put one or two of the videos outside of that, that like email wall, ungated, so that folks can experience that it's free, and then say like, look, we're going to get your email so we can make sure you finish the training, maybe adding some evidence of what you're going to use with that email for. But I think, it is tough, right? There's always going to be skeptics on some level. I won't say that we're going to be able to like, get rid of all haters altogether, because some people are just grumpy and like to be grumpy on the internet. But I do think that that kind of feedback is actually really useful, because a lot of times we throw our ads out and we don't know why they're not working. So to hear from a consumer like, hey, I don't believe you. So that's the question where I would back up and say, okay, well, why might they not believe that this is free? And how could we prove that it's free? So that might mean, okay, let's find some of our awesome customers who have taken it for free and get quotes from them. And let's put those quotes on screen, right? Like, hey, I didn't believe that this was free, but I actually finished it in 25 minutes and it was like so helpful. Tag those people in the comments, who are real customers who can attest that it was great. Get a video testimonial from people who actually experienced it. Show a walkthrough of how you're going to, like, the steps to take to go see it, so that they know, like, hey, when you click this link, here's what's going to happen. Here's what you're going to see. And boom, you're right there. So like make it so they can't doubt you,
Yeah.
And it's a learning experience. And I think in a weird way, I'm glad that we have, comments and things like that, so that we can get that feedback to optimize.
Definitely,
because
yeah.
man, we didn't used to have that. You spend $500,000 on a billboard, leave it there for a month, and you have no idea if it worked or why,
Or even if you have some idea, the feedback loop is so long before you even start to realize,
Oh yeah.
oh, actually, we should not do that. We should have a completely different direction,
Yeah.
maybe. But yeah, okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
And I think
I was just going to say, I was wondering if
free.
your answer would be that some amount of time, even if you only have this one video, this one piece of content, some amount of time in that should be spent on showing a real example and proving it, like you're saying.
Yeah, 100%. Because I think, exactly what we saw, we're still asking someone to take an action. They have to trust us enough to click learn more. They have to trust us enough to click read more, or click over to the site, or, whatever the call to action is. So the trust needs to be earned up front. And some of that, honestly, might just be sequencing. Like, maybe they need to be hit with a couple ads before they really, maybe they need to be hit with a testimonials ad, and then they need to be hit with, something else. It's just maybe there's a sequence to it to kind of earn that trust. But I do think that what's really cool, and, you can learn more about this in Hug Your Haters, the book by Jay Baer, is that when we can convert those skeptics, they often become some of the best, like, advocates and evangelists for the brand, because we've proved, we've earned that trust, and they know what it took to overcome. So, I mean, that would be, honestly, like, I would probably reply to that person or those people and be like,
well,
hey,
what we did in that case is we said, like, hey, you know what? You don't even give us your email. We're just going to give you the link. Here is the training. You can just go and have it, and proved it to them that way. And I would attest to that
and then
too.
You have that proof.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I would attest to that as well, that like the idea of killing the haters with kindness, and still communicating with them instead of ignoring them. Because while there's going to be some people who are just against you for whatever reason, there are those who, the reason that they're a hater is because they have some kind of emotion and passion about what you're talking about, and it made them feel a certain way, but maybe they're uncomfortable about something. And if you can address that and talk to them and let them know, like, hey, like, I'm here, I see what you're saying, and I can help you, then they can really become like your biggest advocates in the future.
And that's the exact skepticism that we were talking about before, right? Which is like, they've probably been burned. Like, somebody told them something was free, and then there was a fee, or, a subscription, or they auto charged their card 6 months later. Like, they've been deceived by that word before, and so they no longer trust it, right? And unfortunately, I feel like in marketing, we often have to pay for the sins of our, our less ethical brethren, and kind of earn back some of the trust that they've burned for us. But it sounds like you guys had a great response engaging with them in the comments, and that hopefully other folks who are seeing that ad now seeing that interaction in the comments, that acts as proof as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say that the definitely like once they hear that, then once they know that you're genuine, then they're going to go out there and tell their friends and say like I've been burned before, but like this person, I talked with them, I'm working with them, I got their whatever it is that they're offering, and like they're the real deal, and like they'll be able to really passionately communicate that after that experience.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that I think is so useful, and we don't see enough of this, I don't think, is like side by side or comparative walkthroughs. So a lot of times in SaaS, there's the claims are around convenience, right? It's easy to use, it's easy to import, it's easy to integrate with existing tools, but nobody ever shows you that. Like, I want to see a video of how fast you can set this thing up and import it. I want to see a video that shows how easy it is to drag and drop and make these things work. Because that stuff goes a long way, right? Because everyone's going to tell you that it's convenient and that it's helpful and that it's easy and that it's affordable. All the claims are out there. So, differentiating yourself with that kind of comparison can be, I mean, it's a great way to stand out for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, I feel not only for like a software business like ours, but I feel like for entrepreneurs selling information courses, coaching, it's more and more important now to show things and to have video on your site. I feel than ever before because now everybody's used to seeing the well-written sales page and hearing like, okay,
Yeah.
you're saying this and okay, you got my attention, but only the video can really show and demonstrate it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's I think the demand for interactive content or just otherwise dynamic content, people get bored easily, and that's not like an offensive thing, to like goldfish brain and talk about how we have no attention span. It just means like there's a lot more exciting things to do. Like, I could be watching TikToks, I could be on Netflix, you could be doing all kinds of fun stuff, rather than spending 20 minutes reading through a sales page. So yeah, the more you can make it interactive and multimedia, the more likely you are to kind of keep somebody interested long enough to show them proof.
Yeah. So our audience, as I mentioned, mainly independent entrepreneurs. What would be your suggestion to them as far as like how they can improve their content creation and taking into account that in general they're going to have limited time and resources compared to like a bigger brand?
Yeah. The biggest thing I think is to actually focus your attention. And I know that sounds so elementary, but like I said, the pressure to be everywhere and do everything is so, so great. You look at someone like a Gary Vaynerchuk, for example, Gary V, very popular on social media. It's easy to compare yourself to someone like that and say, well, I need to be going live 3 times a day. I got to post on Twitter every 15 minutes. I got to be on LinkedIn, and kind of set this unrealistic expectation for yourself, not acknowledging that Gary has a 40-person team that manages his online persona. Like, that's not one human, and you are in fact one human. And so like you need to kind of adjust. It's going to be so much better for you to focus your attention on one or two platforms, or one or two communication channels, like maybe a newsletter and YouTube or something like that, and really put your effort in there, because it will actually move the needle, rather than you being mediocre in 14 places and never getting traction, never breaking through the noise, because you're not being exceptional. So that is honestly, like, do less is my actual piece of advice. Like, figure out where you get your best clients, your best conversion rate, you have the most fun, or whatever it is, and really focus your attention there, rather than trying to sprinkle a little bit of effort all around, and not do enough to make a difference for you.
Yeah, that's great advice, I think, because our kind of strategy ourselves has been figure out what those things are, and then once we get good at them, once we get a following with them, whatever it is, then we figure out, well, how can we do more of it? But
Yep.
if you just start out trying to do all of it, then yeah, I agree. People will maybe they see you once, but then they're not that impressed because you're not that authentic, you're not that valuable in whatever you created, and so then they don't follow
Yeah.
you again. But if you put effort into that one piece of content or that one platform, then they see you
Mhm.
once and then they become a follower.
Yeah. And I mean, it's easy for us to see how that plays out, in other media. Like, think about, I mean, there's some musicians who are just like putting out tracks left and right, and it's like it's never anything super special because you're like, I didn't have to wait for that album. There was no hype. There was no time that went into it. Same thing with TV shows, right? Like shows that come out every single week for like years on end. You're just like, well, I know there's a formula. I mean, it's good, but it's not amazing. Then you have something like Game of Thrones where people are willing to wait like 2 calendar years for a new season because they know it's going to be incredible, right? I think people forget that, we've been sold this myth of like, like the goldfish memory, and people don't pay attention for more than 8 seconds, and everything has to be short and snackable. But like people are still out here scrolling TikTok for 2 hours and watching, binging stuff on Netflix and, reading full length books. Like people don't, it's not that people don't want to consume content. It's that a lot of the content is not worth consuming for that long of a time. So if you make your stuff worth consuming for that amount of time, then you're going to have no trouble earning that audience.
Yeah, yeah, that's great advice. So I want to also talk about stories. Your previous book was titled The Content Fuel Framework: How to Generate Unlimited Story Ideas. Why is storytelling such a critical part of content creation marketing? And how can an entrepreneur come up with new stories, new content ideas?
So, I mean, the good thing is that the book is actually like all about that. Not to throw in a hard sell here. By all means, I have like free guides and things on my website as well. But the thing about content creation and coming up with new ideas is that it needs to be some sort of system or process. What we find is that in so many parts of our business, we have a system. You don't assume you're going to remember all of your clients and customers. You have a CRM, right? You don't assume you're going to remember all the orders. You have a system where the orders come in and a system for how you package and ship them. But when it comes to content creation, it's often this like, I'll come up with something like the day of, hopefully I'll have a good idea. There's no schedule, there's no process, there's no systems around it. And so that's what makes it so challenging to do at scale, because there's no advice for how to scale it, right? So in the book, I kind of walk through just like basically what I do in my head when I'm trying to come up with content ideas. And it's really informed a lot by the journalism side of things. But understanding essentially that a content idea is not one thing. It is actually two things. So a content idea is the what. What are you going to talk about? And then it's the how you're going to bring it to life. So it's actually two things. If you're trying to just, I need a content idea, it's going to be very difficult for you to grasp onto anything because it's too big, right? It's like, I need a movement. Like it's too big of a thing to try to come up with like that. If you think of the what, like what can I talk about? And then you think, okay, well, how can I talk about that? I could do it in a video. I could do it in a podcast. I could do it as an article. I could do it as an issue of my newsletter. By changing it into more of a 1-2 punch where you're coming up with the focus of your content and then the format, it makes it a lot easier to build a system. And it also makes it a lot easier for you to organize and track your ideas, a lot easier for you to do it on demand because you have a more focused prompt to get you in the right place. I like to compare it to whenever anyone finds out that you have like, you're meeting someone new and they find out like you have a skill or a talent, oh, you speak a language other than English, or like, oh, you're a good singer, or, oh, you're funny. The first thing they say, oh, sing something. And like in that moment, you can't think of a single song that's ever existed because you have the entirety of songs, like is your prompt. If they're like, oh, can you sing a Taylor Swift song, right? And you're like, okay, I could pick one of those. Like that's quick and easy. Having that specific prompt, it's actually helpful. Like people think that creativity and idea generation is like this completely free and open thing, but actually it's so much easier to be creative when you do have some confines and some limitations on it, because it's like guardrails for making sure that your efforts are going in the right direction. So that's going to be a big part of it, is just understanding that you're looking for two things. You're looking for what am I going to talk about and how am I going to talk about it, in that order.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's such a great comparison that you gave to explain it too. For myself, like I come from like the product design background with the software, and I think of it the same way, that the creativity it's not this blank slate, but the product is made from the constraints that are set or that you choose to set on it. And without that, it could be nothing. There's almost no value to it, but the constraint brings value to it. It brings focus to it. That's really important. And so like for ourselves, definitely when I'm thinking about that as you're talking, like we do have a process for what happens for a blog post, what happens for a podcast episode like this. And it's made it so much more easy and in my part
Yeah.
for like the podcast almost effortless. I'm spoiled, I guess, that like I didn't have to do anything until I got here and hit record with you. I had teammates booking everything, teammates
Yeah.
researching, writing the questions, everything. But it's because we have that process. And if I was doing it by myself, it would still feel a lot easier and less overwhelming because I had that process in line. So one of the first things that we did when we said we're going to make a podcast is figuring out what's the process going to be, how is all that going to work, and in our case, who's going to do what. So as an entrepreneur, you don't, if you're just yourself right now, you don't have to figure out who's going to do what, but you have to figure out those steps, and then you can apply that, like that prompt, what you're saying, to all of that content creation.
And you're exactly right. And that those prompts can also, to your point about not having maybe a whole team behind you or a bunch of resources, that's also what allows you to choose realistic goals. It's not that I don't want people to stretch, right? Like, it's not that we don't want to set big goals. But if you acknowledge that you have to do the booking, you have to find the guests, you have to write the questions, you have to edit the audio when you're done, you have to upload it to iTunes, you have to promote it on social. Well, like maybe doing a podcast every day is not a great use of your time. Like maybe that's not a scalable solution. Maybe you start every other week for now. And then as it gets better, you increase it to every week. As it gets better, you increase it. As you increase your team, you can increase it. But we see this a lot with content, and I'm guilty of it too. Like if you go to my YouTube, you'll find a very short-lived series called Content Idea Friday, where Free Content Idea Friday, where I took user suggestions and then like shared a bunch of content ideas. But I was overambitious. I started doing it every week and I burnt out. It was too much for what I was actually capable of doing at that point with my available resources. But the way to avoid something like that is to have these kinds of conversations ahead of time. Like, who's going to do what, and the answer might be you in every single case. And how often can we realistically do that? Because that's a lot of work. So should we do it once a week? Should we do it every other week? Maybe we just do one epic ebook every month or something, right? Maybe we do it even less frequently. Or maybe that's a lot of effort, and instead we're going to do super short audio clips that we're going to drop like as reels or something. So you can kind of adjust your goals, your expectations, and your plan based on the realistic amount of resources you need. But it only happens if you actually try to examine the system and figure out what it's going to be. If you just jump in with both feet and you haven't thought about that, you'll end up burning out like I did.
All right, great. So I've got two more questions for you. One more question about this content creation. Off the top of your head, can you recall like a marketing campaign, an ad, or some kind of content that you really admire or you feel like had great results? Not necessarily that you created, but just in general,
Yeah.
something that you've seen.
Well, I don't know if this is the exact right answer to your question. But one that I worked on that I really enjoyed and I felt like we got to do something really unique, was back when I was at HuffPost. So we're going back to like 2013-ish or so. I got to work on Anchorman. Anchorman 2 was coming out, and we wanted to create something to promote Anchorman 2. And what we decided, because HuffPost at that point especially was known for blogging, that people, would have like personal blogs that were part of HuffPost. They were like columnists in a newspaper. Is that we were actually going to act as if Ron Burgundy was a columnist at HuffPost and had his own blog critiquing the media. And so to me, that was just like such a fun campaign where rather than just like, rather than just like running trailers or something, it was like, let's bring this character to life. Like, what would Ron think about the Kardashians and what they're doing right now? Like, how would he talk about these things? And it was able to run in our comedy section, and it was a lot of fun. But I think, again, because instead of just thinking, how do we promote the movie? How do we get people to buy tickets? It was like, how can we make this something our audience is interested in? And if they're interested in Ron Burgundy, then they're going to care about his opinions on these kinds of things. So that was a lot of fun for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah, that is really neat, and I think that's a great idea, a great approach to it. All right, so my last question for you. This is something we like to do to have each of our guests ask a question to the audience. So if you could ask anything to our audience, it could be something that you're curious about. It could be something like an introspective thing you kind of want our audience to think about. What would that be?
I think the biggest question that I would like for all of you who are listening to think about is, what's the one thing I need my audience to know about me in order for them to trust me? What's the one thing they need to know in order to trust me? Because if you can answer that question, then you know exactly what you need to be creating content about, exactly the type of proof you need to create. So that's where I would start. What do I need my audience to know in order to trust me?
Awesome. All right, that's great advice. All right, well, Melanie, thanks so much for coming on the show. Before we get going, where else can people find you online?
Sure. So my home base is storyfuel.co. So easy to remember because my last name's Deziel. So it's storyfuel, FUEL.co. That's where you'll find info about the books, about working with me, about, all my social links if you want to track me down wherever you like to hang out. So storyfuel.co is a place to go.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.